Most of Illustrator's preference settings reside in this ginormous multi-panel dialog box known as Preferences. But there's one preference setting that we're going to change up front here that does not, and that is the display of the bounding box. I'm going to go ahead and zoom in on these letters one-on-one by pressing Control and Spacebar or Command and Spacebar on a Mac and dragging around them like so. And then I'll grab my selection tool, which is a black arrow at the top of the toolbox, and I will click anywhere inside these letters to select them. Now notice that these aren't technically speaking letters. They look like letters, and they started off as letters, but they're not editable text. And that's because I converted the text to path outlines, the reason being that way you don't need to own the same font that I use to create this text, which happens to be Futura, and I certainly didn't know if that was on your machine or not, and I couldn't switch this text out to something like Times Roman, which I know you have, but is not the font we use for the logo. Anyway, regardless of whether you select text or graphics or what you're selecting, and in this case I've got a group of objects selected, you'll see a bounding box by default around the entire thing. And the bounding box is a rectangle with 8 handles on it. And you can drag inside the rectangle to move the object to a different location, or you can drag one of these corner handles in order to resize the graphic like so. In this case, I stretch the graphic. Let's say I don't want to do that. I press Control-Z, Command-Z on the Mac. And this time, as I drag the corner handle, I'll press and hold the Shift key in order to constrain the proportions of my drag. And I'll keep the Shift key down until I release, and then I'll release the Shift key. Notice if you hover your cursor just outside the bounding box, you get this little rotate cursor, and then you can rotate the text by dragging it. That's pretty nifty. And there's a few other things you can do with the bounding box as well. So you may be looking at it and thinking, wow, that bounding box, that thing rocks, that is cool. I hate it. I'm going to press Control-Z or Command-Z on the Mac a couple of times, actually, in order to reset my text to its original position. The problem with the bounding box is it really gets in your way of performing exacting modifications inside of Illustrator. And we'll see the many things you can do with this bounding box turn the heck off. But basically, it makes it very difficult to snap points, especially the points appear here in the corners of the graphic. Then they're covered up by these handles, which allow you to scale and so on, so that gets in your way. Plus, the bounding box is a crutch. And if you get in the habit of relying on a bounding box inside of Illustrator, you will never learn the really, truly great ways to scale and rotate graphics inside of Illustrator, which rely on separate tools. There's a rotate tool, which is totally wicked great. It's an awesome tool. And you have an excellent scale tool as well. And these tools allow you to scale from specific locations inside of a graphic, scale with all kinds of control. You can scale numerically. You also have, by the way, if you go up to the window menu and choose the transform command, then you've got a transform panel that allows you to scale the graphic using these width and height values. You can rotate, you can skew, and so on. So I'm going to go ahead and close that panel, but what I'm saying is the bounding box is not our friend. I am assuming throughout the rest of this series you have it turned off, and that's going to be very important. To do so, go up to the View menu and choose Hide Bounding Box. Notice it has a keyboard shortcut of Control-Shift-B, Command-Shift-B on the Mac, and that will hide that bounding box forevermore. It's a global modification. It's not saved as an attribute of the illustration, in other words. Now, if somebody else comes to your machine and turns the bounding boxes back on, or if you decide to, I mean, every so often they can be a little bit useful, why then all you need to do is press Control-Shift-B or Command-Shift-B once again to turn them off. So here goes. I'll select this text. Now I decide that I want the bounding boxes. I'll press Control-Shift-B, and there it is, Command-Shift-B on the Mac. Then I decide I don't want the bounding box. I press Control-Shift-B again, Command-Shift-B again to make them go away. If ever the bounding box comes on screen and it's getting in your way as you're trying to follow along with me in one of my exercises, then remember, press Control-Shift-B, Command-Shift-B on the Mac, or go up to the View menu and choose what would show up here is Hide Bounding Box in order to make them go away.